Hello, this is a workshop, virtual recording tutorial, whatever you want to call it, for organisms, matter cycling, and energy flow. This is looking at the flow of energy and the cycling of matter in the ecosystem from the role of organisms into that. So specifically, we're talking about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And there's a little bit of here about plant structures that facilitate that as well. And this is designed to help students pass a content assessment as Summit platform for seventh grade science, but it can be a helpful review for anyone who needs help with these topics, especially if you're in seventh grade science or middle school science in general. So the first objective is to help us identify the key parts of plants which are used to collect and transport food and water within the plant. And of course, you're going to need to talk about the leaf, which is the central organ of photosynthesis, the stem, which helps to support the plant and transfer materials throughout it, and the roots, which absorb nutrients and also help anchor the plant. We are not going to talk much about flowers and fruits, which are mostly reproductive organs for the plant in this content assessment. There's another one that's dedicated to that, but they are also important parts of the plant. The first thing I want to talk about in more detail is this idea of xylem and phloem. They're parts of what is called the vascular system of plants, which is the part of the plants which transfer nutrients throughout the plant. So if you look inside the plant, in either the root, the stem, or the leaf, you're going to find these tubes that carry water, nutrients, sap, sugar, and throughout the plant. So the xylem is going to be the one that transfers organic materials like glucose and sugar coming from the leaves after they did photosynthesis. And I remember that because phloem kind of sounds like food, and it also starts with a pH, which, the same thing that photosynthesis starts with. And then there's an L, which comes from, has to do with leaves. So I remember it's the photosynthesis coming from the leaves, and it flows from there. Now, it does have end walls or little barriers ever so often inside, which help transport and control what comes in or out of that tube. And then it can actually be closed to cut out food supply to certain parts of the plant if the plant is desperate to preserve certain parts over others, or if it needs to get rid of a branch that no longer needs, or a part of it that's sick. And the cells are all alive within the phloem, which is the difference between the xylem and the phloem. And the molecules also can move either way because you want to be able to send food back up if it's no longer necessary. Some plants even store food in the roots of the plant. And if they ever need it again, they can push that back up through those tubes. Meanwhile, the xylem only moves up and is to bring water and nutrients and minerals from the soil up to the leaves where the photosynthesis takes place. And it doesn't really have these closings within the tube, but it does have almost like valve-looking things which prevent the water to flow backwards. And it also has dead cells around the walls instead of living cells. And I remember xylem because it starts with an X, and it reminds me of roots because roots kind of have an X shape that goes everywhere in every single direction. And that's kind of hard to remember that xylem brings the water from the actual leaves from the roots towards the leaves. So if you look inside of the root, the stem, or the leaf, you will see that there's tubes. And usually the xylem is going to be on the inside side and the phloem on the outside. The reason for that is that the water will flow from the inside towards the outside, kind of like a natural irrigation system, from where it's a lot of water to where it's drier, which is going to be the outside. And that's called osmosis, or the process of transferring the water from the inside towards the outside. And so you can find that the xylem is going to be in the inner side usually. And the phloem is also going to be towards the center, but usually outside of the xylem. And that's the pattern that repeats itself throughout the plant in each of these different structures. There are, by the way, some plant families that do not have these complex vascular systems. Mosses, which you can see growing on top of rocks. They're usually the pioneer species that grows on the rock after volcanic eruption in a brand new island, or after a volcano erased a previous life in a certain area, after a fire, at the bottom of a forest where there's not a lot of sunlight. They're the ones that are going to be those pioneer species that are going to start the process of conquering an ecosystem with plants. And they're very limited in size because they don't have vascular systems, though. They don't have the ability to transfer water very high up, so they're going to be very, very tiny. There are also plants, by the way, that don't have seeds. Mosses certainly don't have seeds at all, but ferns, which are bigger and do have the vascular systems that we talked about, they don't have seeds. And then you have other families of plants that have seeds but don't have flowers or fruits, and they're called gymnosperms. Like coniferous trees are an example of that. And finally, the more advanced plants will have all of these features, including flowers and fruits. And those are the angiosperms that evolved just around the time, right before the dinosaurs evolved, and have conquered the earth and spread all over the place since then because it helped them explode through sexual reproduction with a lot of variety. But not all plants have vascular systems or seeds or flowers. So these are the main families of plants. Now, the other important structure that plants use to do photosynthesis is going to be the leaf. Leaf is like the organ of photosynthesis, and it's designed perfectly to help plants do that job. So if you look at a cross section of the leaf, it's going to look kind of like this. You have at the top, there's a cuticle. It's like a layer of wax that helps protect the plant from losing water, especially at the top where it gets blasted by sunlight. Then both at the top and the bottom, you have an epidermis, which is a layer of skin, essentially. Just like you and me have skin on the outside protecting the leaf, you're going to find that on the outside. Then underneath that layer of skin, you're going to have these column-like cells, which are super green. That's why they call phyll, because of chlorophyll. They're filled with that. And meso, because they're in the middle. And these mesophyll cells are the ones that do most of the photosynthesis. Now, the ones at the top, called palisade basophils. Palisade is another word for columns. And they look like columns, and they're really, really tall like that, and all stacked next to each other to protect the plant from overheating. If the cells that do photosynthesis get too hot, they start doing the opposite of what they're supposed to, and they start capturing oxygen, which kind of destroys the entire machinery of the process that is supposed to happen for photosynthesis to take place. And so for the chemistry to work, it can't be overheated. And so these cells are there to help act as like a heat sink to protect the cells that do most of the photosynthesis, which are actually the spongy mesophyll cells. And they're called spongy because there's a lot of space between them, because there's a lot of gas coming in and out, that carbon dioxide that's coming in and the oxygen that's coming out, and that fills the space between the cells, and that's why they look like more spongy. On the bottom of the leaves, there's also a holes called stomata, which have two cells next to them to open and close the holes as necessary to control whether or not the plant is letting carbon dioxide in or not. And the reason they close sometimes is that to prevent the plant from losing water, which is also why they're on the bottom instead of the top, because that way there's less water loss. So sometimes when plants, they have to make a compromise between being able to do photosynthesis and having to lose water. So you can't do one without the other. And so that's how they control the amount of water that's flowing and whether or not the gases are coming in and out and photosynthesis is actually taking place. There's also a vein that I showed you in the previous picture too, which is where that phloem and xylem kind of flow in and out of. Remember, the phloem carries the sugar out and the xylem brings the water in from the leaves. And that's like a tube that connects to the rest of the plant to distribute nutrients throughout it. And that's basically the cross-section of the leaf, which is the most important organ that does photosynthesis of the plant. Now, the other structures that are important is if you look inside the actual mesophyll cells, you're going to see that there are tiny little structures inside, each that do a specific job. And those structures are called organelles, the most important of which in a plant is definitely the chloroplast. That's what makes it unique. The chloroplasts are these tiny little organelles that have its own internal structures, all designed to act like a little solar power plant, trapping the sunlight and using it to produce food for the plants. Chloroplasts are actually kind of alive. They have their own linear membranes, they have their own DNA, and in fact, we think that they descend from ancient photosynthetic bacteria that got enveloped by an ancient cousin of plants, probably an ancient algae. And in doing so, that algae became a bit able to produce its own food through the actual chloroplast. And in return, the chloroplast gets safety, gets minerals, gets supply of nutrients provided by the safety of the larger cell. And this is called endosymbiosis, and it's the theory that we think led to the formation of these plants. And so in a way, all plants in the planet and all algae don't really do photosynthesis. It's really the little tiny bacteria living inside of all of them, which is technically kind of alive, that's really doing it. Now, nowadays, you won't find chloroplasts on their own out there without any plants around them, without the plant cell itself or the algae cell, but you will find causes of them. And we'll talk about that later in the lecture series. But very important organelles found inside of each plant. So here, let's go ahead and review all the things we talked about in this video. The roles of each part of the plants. Remember, the stem carries nutrients that support the plant. The root absorbs nutrients and anchors the plant. And they both have in complex plants vascular systems inside to do that job. The leaves are the site of photosynthesis. The phloem carries the sugar or sap from the leaves to the rest of the plants. And the xylem carries water and nutrients out to the leaves so that the plants can do their job. The tinier structures, we have the stomata, which are the holes in the bottom of the leaves that let gases in or out and also control the amount of water that can come in and out of the plant. Mesophyll cells are the names of the plant cells that do most of photosynthesis on the inner side of those leaves. And they have organelles or specialized cell machineries inside, especially the chloroplasts, which is an organelle that does photosynthesis for the plant. And that's the first objective, the plant structures involved with making sure plants can do photosynthesis. On the next video, we're going to talk about photosynthesis itself and its role for the ecosystem, for the world, for the history of the planet, and everything. I'll see you guys then.